and welcome flip clock fans. This is our first FAQ, frequently asked questions about flip clocks. Now how all this got started was someone, a visitor to the Flip Clock Fans channel, asked a question on a video regarding the Copal 225. So I know a little bit about the Copal 225, and so we're going to talk about that specifically, but we're also going to answer a lot of questions that I'll often get in various videos in the comment section. This probably can't be all inclusive of those questions, but I'm going to try to hit everything. So this is going to be a long video. I'll put in the description a timestamps of where you'll find certain questions and hopefully proper answers. And so that'll help you a little bit get to what you're looking for. It is going to be a long video, so when I get my statistics back, it's going to say people don't like this video because they're not watching it very much. Speaking of that, if you could throw a like on this video at any point along the way, if it's helped you in any way, it really does help me with my channel. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing. That also helps and keeps me going. Anyway, so what are the questions we're going to answer? So here are a few. Some may come up more as we go along, but specifically for the 225, why does the hour tile drop early? Other questions: why does my flip clock make sounds? And what are the parts of a flip clock called? Here's another question: why do I oil my clock's, or where do I oil my clock's motor? And then why do I oil my clock's motor? Where are the bearings in this clock? Why does the motor work but the clock does not flip? How do I fix that? Where do I get bulbs? Where do I get parts, gears? What oils or stuff should I use on my clock? So that's some of the questions we're going to go through. So first of all, we're going to talk about why does the clock flip early on the hour? Because what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to get up here to 59 and then drop to the next hour, obviously. So let's look at that. Why does that happen? So you want to look at the parts of the clock and how they operate, specifically regarding dropping the tiles. Now, a lot of flip clocks are different, but many flip clocks about this time will have extensions on this tab to push this spring over. So this spring here is crucial. If it's moving up and down, it's not connected properly back here. So if that's not in the hole, you've got to get that in the hole. That spring goes into the middle, secured into the bar, comes out here, and it's under tension. Now in this specific clock, you'll see that the wheel expanded. So I'll go through again. So there it dropped. So see this thickening? It'll thicken there. As that thickens, it pushes that spring over. Now that spring is not doing anything right now. So we're going along, then it just dropped the tile. The thing that's holding this hour back is this spring. I could just move that out of the way and that would drop down if I could do that, but I can't because that's there. So what happens? That thickening disappears. And then what's left holding that? Well, shoot, sorry. What's left holding that is the 59. So the 59 has an expansion. Like I said, in other clocks from about 45, it has an expansion as well. But in this case, only one flip tile has that. So if your flip clock's not flipping, what you're looking at is either you're missing this extension, or this is not bent correctly. So you may have that maybe bent up this way a little bit, so it's not catching. So it needs to be catching. It needs to look exactly like that right there. So that's probably your problem. This isn't moved over. You're missing this, because when that 59 drops, that drops. So that's probably what's going on with your clock. To answer that, why does my flip clock make noise? Well, there's a lot of things on here that makes noise, and you've heard a lot of that. Now hear all this ruckus here. Now when I'm flipping that, my mind perceives that it's coming from from here. noise, because that's what's moving. But it's not coming from there. I'm going to show you where that noise is coming from and why it's doing that. So if you don't have the motor on, if the motor's not connected, that's the noise a flip clock mechanism makes. It's like wings of a bird or something. So it's not making all this ruckus. So what is that noise? Well, what you've got here is a slip clutch. And when the motor's connected, and the motor's connected right to this wheel here. So when the motor's connected there, and you try to turn this clock, well, that's going to strip the motor, unless you have a slip clutch. It's what I would call a ratcheting slip clutch. Sometimes in vintage clocks, that's just on there and it's holding by friction, by pressure, by spring. But this, you'll see this ratchet. When I hold this, like I'm going to pretend I'm the motor here, and you can see that it's the ratcheting that's making that noise. That needs to work. So in a second here, we're going to go into a little more detail about how this flip clock actually works. I mean, we talked a little bit about that. Well, we'll do it now. What the heck? So how are the minutes and the hours connected? How does that happening? And you'd think, well, it's happening in there somewhere. They're connected that way. Well, that's not how it works. And you know, the other question might be, why don't they just make it so it exactly drops? You know, that they use these parts here to exactly drop. Well, it's just not practical. That's why they had to use this. These things here hold back the numbers, and that little spring makes it exact. But so what turns this? Well, if your knob is on your clock, of course you're turning here. The part that's turning that, okay. See, this is a little more clear. There's this right here. That right there goes into this minute wheel. It fits right in there. It's only about this long, fits in there. I might take this apart to show you, just for fun later in the video. It fits in there. It's connected to this rod by a flat spot. So that little plastic thing's right here. So whether you turn here, or whether the motor is turned here, the rod that's straight through here moves this by this. Well, how does the hours move? Well, you'd think there's some kind of gears in here that's doing that. There's not. They're not. These two aren't even connected. Here's how that works. The hours are connected to this gear. So when you turn the minutes, there's another gear here that moves this gear, and then down here that gear translates up to here. So they've geared that such that for every rotation here you get the number drop, like so. Of course, there's 2 hour tiles for every hour, and they have to do that because they're trying to match the number of tiles here. You got 60 tiles over here, and you'd only have 24 hour tiles, so they had to at least get that fit closer to the 60 so that it just suits it better, and it works fine. Some of the more vintage clocks actually have 5 hour cards, but they don't have AM and PM. Okay, so that's where some of that noise is coming from. Some of the other noise, of course, is going to be from the tines itself, the number holdbacks. So I'm already starting to get into what some of these things are called. So it's just flipping off of there, flipping these tiles. There's also at the hour, you hear that? That loud noise there is not the hour number flipping. It's this spring going back and hitting these numbers. I've often wondered if you put a little piece of felt there, if that wouldn't quiet that. But it would probably, let's see, if you put a little piece of felt right there, because it's not doing anything, it's not going to be impeded here. I think if you had a little piece of felt there, or like a piece of like a rubber cement or something like that, that it might quiet that. But if you don't like the sounds this thing's making, just don't use it as your bedside table, and maybe you shouldn't be into flip clocks because I like that sound. You don't want it too loud or anything like that. Okay, so again, we've already started. The next question is what are the parts called? And so we'll go through that. Now, these I often call tines because they look like tines of a fork, and that's what I call them. Now, in the patents, they'll call those a lot of different things. They're one patent in particular, they call these arresting fingers. So it's sometimes you could call them tile holdbacks or whatever. What should you call them? You should call them tines because that's what I call them. But call them whatever you want. But that's how to try to communicate to people. These are arresting fingers or they're tines. And what are these called? Well, they're flip tiles, right? You can call them. They've been called pages. They've been called a lot of things. But we often in flip clock world call them tiles, flip tiles. You can call them pages. You can call them leafs. So in some of the advertisements, they're called leaf. It's a leaf type clock. They'll say leaf type. So they call these leafs, L-E-A-F. You can call them whatever you want, but I'd say leaf tile. People will know what you're talking about. Of course, this is a clock mechanism. These are the mechanism gears. This is the clock motor. Now, this is the motor proper. So really, the electric motor is just this part here. That's just the motor. And you see that motor comes into one little gear there, one brass gear, that's going to start impacting. The next part we're going to talk about is the gearbox. So that's the mechanism gears. This is the gearbox. So inside of there you're going to have gears that take that movement, that rotation there, which is really fast, and gears it down to where it moves this at exactly the right rate so that a tile drops every minute. And sometimes people will say, well, how do you adjust the speed of a flip clock? Well, these vintage flip clocks are run on synchronous, depend upon the synchronous electricity. So in the United States, we're running, in Canada and other parts, we're running at 60 hertz per minute of a frequency of your electricity. So there's a sine wave in the electricity, and it cycles for every second. There's 60 waves. It takes that, and using magnets in the rotating magnetic field that's set up because of the coil in here, it spins this. There's underneath this hood here, this spinning thing. So what is that spinning thing? Now, I call it a whirligig, and if people call it a whirligig, I know they've listened to my videos. You should call it a whirligig, but really what it is, it's the rotating part of the motor. Now, some people will try to correct you and say this is not a rotor, but technically a rotating part of an electric motor is the rotor. But a lot of people say no, it has to have that windings on it, so the part with the windings, and they'll call this the rotor, which kind of goes against convention because it's not moving, and rotor implies moving. So underneath this is the windings, and you can see a cage here. And now those windings and this cage sets up a rotating magnetic field. Underneath this sticker and this little metal is a magnetic strip. So that rotating magnetic field pushes that around. Really good motor. These have lasted for many, many years, 40, 50 years, and they're still working. So this is called a Copal 2 mechanism. It's just one of the best. Okay, so any other parts? Well, pretty much that's it. There's you can, sometimes people say, well, what is this? It's the plastic front. Well, that's what I call it. You can call it the face of the clock, the plastic here. My plastic's all scratched up. What do you call the part that's underneath of that? I call it a bezel, and a lot of other people do. You can call it whatever, front piece. I call it the bezel. You see it says Copal. We call that the badge. You can call that a name badge. So someone's lost their badge, and they say, hey, do you have a Copal badge, floating around that you don't need, or Panasonic badge? Those are common. They fell off a lot of those early clocks. So is any other parts? I can't think of any other parts right now to talk about. Okay, so where do I oil my clock's motor? And then the second question to that is, why do I oil my clock's motor? Well, the only moving part in your clock is this wheel, this rotor, this whirligig. That's it. Now, what's that What's that tape on there for? Well, in the manuals and in the instruction book, they call that a operation indicator. So if you see that spinning, you know that the clock is operating. So as you may see, this clock is operating. You see it spinning. It's an operation indicator. But where do you oil your clock? No, I tell you what, if you got it down this far, which is, look, it's going to be a trick. You can oil here, and you're going to oil here. And I'm going to show you why in a second. Why would you do that? You're trying to get oil to drip down and get to that post. And that's going to work its way through here. So people, there's another question is, where are the bearings? Plural, they'll say, where are the bearings? They're imagining like balls rolling because, you know, it's spinning. All this is an axle. And inside of there is a bushing. So it's a thin little axle. You can see how right inside of there, you see how small that is. Well, there's a little bushing, and that fits almost exactly. It's called an oil-impregnated brass bushing, and it's usually made out of brass shavings that have been compressed. Now, you can compress them, and it's hard, and you can't really break it easily, but it'll still have spaces in it, and they impregnate that with oil. So that oil-impregnated brass bushing is what it's called. Will keep this clock going for years and years. Now, that'll get used up over time and dry out. So by dropping it down there, you're hoping to hit that, let it get through there, and re-oil that bearing. So that bushing. So it's more properly called a bushing, and you can call it a bearing if you want to. So that's why you do it. Now I'm going to open this up, hopefully, without much grief. You really don't. If you're going to try to put something like this back together, you really don't want to use a pair of pliers, which is probably what I should use just for speed here. But you can pry that gear off. Now, are you going to get down this far? Probably not, unless you're into clocks. I mean, really into fixing things and gears. And a lot of people want to know, how do you do it? And I would tell people, look, if you wouldn't consider changing your brake pads on your car, wouldn't even consider it. You're like, oh, no way, I'm not into that. Or opening up a heater in your house to figure out why it's not working. Well, you probably don't want to be doing this either. It's not. Now, it's, if you're mechanically inclined and you want to do that, you can learn that stuff. I didn't used to know that I could work on cars until these 18-year-olds on YouTube started showing me what to do. I can do a lot of stuff. I replaced the axles on the CV axles on a Toyota just a couple weekends ago. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying. I mean, I saved myself a lot of hundreds of dollars doing that. So anyway, look, this ain't a Toyota. So if you want to take a chance, go ahead and take a chance. But the problem I get is people will get in the comments and say, how do you do that? How do you do that? And it's like, well, I can't see your clock, and it's hard for me to try to tell you how to do stuff like that. So I've taken off that. Now, I know I'm talking a lot. I had one old feller, and I think what the young people would call a boomer. Now, I hate that because I'm at the tail end of what's called a boomer. So I'm technically a boomer. But anyway, I hate that terminology, boomer. But anyway, this boomer gets on my YouTube thing, and he starts talking about me, and he says, this guy likes to hear himself talk, and, you know, people just need to get right to the point and just tell how to answer this question. I said, I want to talk to you, man. I am not Flip Clock customer service. I'm not a Copal's guy. And I'm just a guy that likes flip clocks. And I try to help people. So if you don't appreciate that, goodbye. But yeah, he got on to me, so I deleted his comment. I didn't leave it up there. But and I'm all right. Look, most of you guys are awesome. And probably all of you guys are awesome, except that one guy. He probably just didn't understand. So if you're watching this video, go back to bed. So anyway, so here's this. We've taken that off. This comes off like that. So if you ever find your clock in that state, you're in trouble because the gears come off in the back. So that's why maybe your clock spins, but your clock's not moving. Now that's rare. That's rare to happen. There's another reason this is spinning and your clock's not working. Well, if this could be the problem, what could be the other problem? Well, it's going to be in your gearbox, isn't it? Yes, it could be the mechanism gears. That's not likely. You can see everything's in good shape here. So again, to get into here, you're going to have to change the brakes on your Toyota, and when you're done with that, you can start breaking into that. So you've got to get that plastic off. How do you get the plastic off? People say, Mike, well, I try to warm it up a little bit, and then you're going to have to pop it off. Then there's all kinds of things you've got to do. You can drill that out and pop this case off here to try to get to the gears. Now, what's happened with this clock? And why doesn't your clock work? Hey, Mike, I'm calling myself Mike. It's Mike or Mackie. I usually go by Mackie online. But hey, Mackie, why is my clock spinning but it's not working? Well, look here. That gear looks like an umbrella. It's rough shape. It's like, and some of these are, oh man, I don't know if you saw that, but they're like turning to powder. They're just tore up. This gearbox is never going to work. Oh, well, I'll just rebuild it. I have the technology. Mackie, I can do that. Okay. Then they want to know, where do I get the gears? Well, look, man, I'm going to get another clock that may be messed up in other ways, and hopefully this is better. Now, I have taken this apart, and some of my more astute flip clock fans will do that, and they'll get in there and they'll find the exact gear. If you do, you'll have to describe the size of it, the number of teeth here, and the number of teeth here, and then put a word out and see if you can't find it. If you find a place online that sells things like that, let me know, but I don't generally have that information. So that's your gearbox, and this is a chewed up gearbox, and it did come out of a 225. So that's pretty rough. Okay. Now, what's that next question? Oh yeah, what we talked about, where are the bearings? Well, there's no bearing. It's just a post. It's just a post. I drop oil here and drips down to here. That's just brass. You're not oiling that. You're not oiling this little spot here. The oil's dripping down here, hitting this plate, and that fits right into there. So you're trying to get that oil to work its way here, get into this here. You see there's not much space here. So it may take several times of oiling to get that in there. Now, after a while, you're going to get too much oil in here. I've had folks tell me they'll do that and they'll kind of blow it out with the air gun or a little compressed air because they're getting too much oil in there. Because you don't need oil here. There's no need for oil here. This looks like something that would move or roll, but it doesn't. You've got the windings, copper windings in there, and this squirrel cage that sets up the magnetic field. Some of these 225s are known to make a lot of noise. How do you fix that? Well, you can try to adjust the can. You can see this wobbles a little bit. That's probably due to the wear on that bushing inside of there. There's not a lot you can do about that. Seriously, I mean, if you really want to get down to that much, try to fix that. More power to you, but generally I would just get another motor. So people say, where do you get parts? So again, you just get on eBay. You got a clock that's messed up. This was actually new in box. But you get a clock that's messed up. You hope the motor's in good shape. You just swap out the motors. That's your best way. My opinion. Okay, so that's just kind of curious. There's your magnetic strip. Now people, they say, well, Mike, back in the old days, you used to tell us to put alcohol in there, and it cleaned it out and worked, and it did. Sometimes the alcohol would go in there, and it would break it loose, because if you get a clock and it's not spinning freely, it's funny, this one wasn't spinning freely, but I was testing it, and it's spinning a little better now. If it's not spinning fast, that oil may have got gunked up. Alcohol goes down in there, travels down this rod, kind of loosens that up, but ultimately it doesn't work very well. And then I do alcohol and do a drop of oil. I've come to not doing that at all. I just use a nice oil. You can get clock oil online. You can use a thin motor oil. Believe it or not, motor oil is supposedly really good. People use 3-in-1 oil. People say, what about WD-40? Now, that's controversial. I have found that I've used alcohol sometimes, a clock that I just can't get to budge. And again, I moved away from alcohol. So I started, sometimes when I'm desperate, if regular oil, and you got to give it time. You get the oil down in there, you spin it. If the motor's running, you let it run for several hours and put some more oil in there. That's the best way. But I have used WD-40, and it was the only thing that broke it loose. I don't know why. It has some kind of solvents in it. After that, you blow that out, let it spin a while. You want to get a good oil in there, a good clock oil, and you can get stuff like that online, liquid bearings and stuff like that, they call that. Why don't you want to use alcohol? Well, a restorer online clued me into that. He said if you soak these things in alcohol, the glue on the back of this magnetic strip will come undone. That strip will come off. Then you're in bad shape. So the other thing is alcohol will often mess up the whirligigs operation indicator sticker. Alcohol will take that off. Excessive use of WD-40 will take that sticker off. So you want to do a drop of oil into your motor. So there's that. All right. Now, where do I get bulbs? Okay, so that's a question. So you look at this clock and you see this is pretty blackened. This has been used and abused. That's how you know this clock has a lot of history. Sometimes you can get a clock where maybe they put it up after a while. So you can see this one here is less blackened. You can tell a clock if it's been used because it'll have indentions there from the arresting fingers, or the tines, which I call them. This has some use in it. It's still fine. The bulb is not as blackened as some. It's not clear. This one has more indentions. You can see it's almost wearing down, but the bulb is blackened. And that happens because the material on the electrodes spit off up against the glass wall. These things are really amazing. They're ancient technology. Really go way back. They used to call them operation indicators. They're called neon glow bulbs. So where do you get those bulbs? Well, these use the neon glow bulbs. A good one is called the indicator. It may be called a NE2, NEH2. These I get online, and they're indicated C2A. So C2A is a really good replacement. Just go online, Google up C2A. I'll try to include some sites that actually have these and where I would get them. For some reason, the vintage bulbs are better. They just are better. They're better made. The ones now are made in Taiwan. These will just last forever. But the C2As you can get online, made in Taiwan, they last fine. They do just fine. They get a good color and a good glow. Now there's another for like your regular Panasonics and stuff like that. They use a 15 milliamp 12 volt bulb, and again I'll include a link to where you can get those. Those two are the most common, your C2As, neon glow bulbs, and that's what you'd look up online, neon glow bulb. Some call them neon lamps. C2A is the indicator, NEH2, that's the old style. But most of your other bulbs mostly are going to be the 12 volt 50 milliamp, and again we'll talk about, I'll show you where to get that. So I did talk a little bit about the oils. What other kind of stuff can you use on your clocks? You don't want to use alcohol. I know I started out talking about that. It was back in the infancy of me learning about clocks. There really was nothing online. Again, not bragging, it just wasn't. A lot of people got mad at me in the beginning of all this flip clock stuff because they were trying to restore clocks. I was telling people how to do it themselves. So even some of the restorers went through that. Some of the really good restorers out there did the alcohol for a while until we just kind of learned together that that's not a good plan. So alcohol, and again with alcohol, you say, oh, you can just clean parts with alcohol. I'd be really careful about that. Alcohol causes problems. It can mess up ABS plastic. It can definitely mess up wood grain plastic. So I get away from alcohol. Cleaning tiles, used to use alcohol. Now I just use water. I use plain water and just wipe each tile because these are dirty. Now some people never go that deep, but I'll wash each individual tile. Got to go all the way through each individual tile with a Q-tip and just water. So what else? So we got oils. We talked about oils. This stuff is great. There are other brands, but this is the best. So if you're doing tuner knobs and stuff like that, you want deoxit. Now, people did ask. They said, hey, can I use deoxit inside of my motor? Just squirt some of this deoxit in there. And I wouldn't do that. You don't want to use that. That's got a certain purpose. It's not the right stuff. So you probably could, and it probably would work. This PAO grease, that's good for gears. inside the gearbox. If you did open up a gearbox, wherever that went off to, you could lubricate those gears with this stuff. It's not going to break down nylon or plastic gears, so this is good stuff. This stuff here, and this isn't the only brand, it's a nice grease that you can use on like different sliders and stuff like that, and some of the flip-clop radios. That's a good stuff. There's other stuff like this that just provides a lubrication. I used to use this Lubrifilm. It's like, it's just a clear fluid, but gel like. But I use this stuff now more than anything. Lithium grease. Sometimes instead of this, you could use lithium grease for different sliding parts. Now, as far as when you're doing parts, like broken parts, well, super glue is your best bet for stuff like that. But if I was doing some super glue on a cracked case and it got out here, it's going to ruin it. It's going to ruin your case. Oh, you're going to have to sand and you're going to have to polish, so you got to be really careful with super glue. For general adhesive, I love this stuff, and I actually think this is very similar, or the type of adhesive they used in different parts of your clock. It is very heat resistant. It's used for, its main thing was for Whirlpool. We would adhere the felt to the dryer with this stuff, so you can use this around, I've used it around transformers and stuff like that inside the clocks, the clock radios where I knew that we're going to get warm. This stuff just is not going to catch on fire once it dries. It is flammable. Right now it's flammable, but when it dries, it's not a danger. And it can be, it's almost like hot glue, because you can break it loose. You can strip off that old felt, but you're going to have some residue and stuff like that. I really like that stuff. Okay, so that's it. This has been a long video. There's probably more questions, and you can ask them in the comments if you have any more questions about flip clocks in general. I'd love to answer them. A very long video again. I'm going to try. If you've made it this far, here's your prize. No, there is no prize. I just do appreciate you guys. I do appreciate the questions. It gives us opportunity to talk about flip clocks. It's something I love. Well, thanks for taking the time.